Hello everyone, it's great to have you with us today for our webinar on moving to France and buying French property. My name's Karen Tate, I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm a freelance journalist and for the past 20 or so years I've been editing French Property News magazine in the UK, and I also contribute to titles such as the Sunday Times. I'm joined today by our panel of experts who are all waiting to answer your questions. Thanks to those of you who've already sent in questions. If you have any questions during the webinar, there is a box to the right of your screen. You can post them there. So firstly, I'll pass over to our panelists to introduce themselves. So should we start with Joanna?
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you for coming along this evening. I'm Joanna Leggett, so I'm one of the family members at Leggett Immobilier. We started over 22 years ago now in a little office in the Dordogne, and we've grown from strength to strength. We now cover the whole of France, so we can advise on any areas that you might be interested in. We have a team of 650 agents all across France that all live and work in their areas. So they'll be able to give you advice and give you information on the areas that they live in. And at some stage, we were all like yourselves, all thinking about moving to France and coming along to well, we didn't have webinars in those days, but coming along to exhibitions and to find out as much information as we can. So hopefully it will be good for you this evening. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Joanna. And Tracy?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a residency and relocation expert. I'm based in the south of France and have been here for the past 30 years. It's my job at LBS to help everybody like yourselves who are moving, living, or wanted to create a business in France. We're a team of 5. And yes, our job is really anything to do with visas and healthcare from an affiliation perspective, of course. Driving licenses, car registrations, business creations, business management, all of those wonderful paperwork processes that you have to go through when you move into France. So hopefully going to help you with some questions tonight.
Thanks, Tracy. And Sharon?
Hi everybody, I'm Sharon Revol. I'm a French mortgage broker. I work for CAFI and I look after the international team here. We're 14 brokers specialised in international, non-resident and expat clients. I've lived in France myself for 27 years and I've been a French mortgage broker for 22 years. So quite passionate about French mortgages. Hope you can all come and live in France. It's a wonderful place and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Hi everybody, I'm Paulette Booth. I'm the co-founder and director of Agence AXA International. We're a dedicated English-speaking AXA agency covering the whole of France. I've been in France for 15 years. Our team, we sound, really large. AXA in France, AXA International. We're actually a small team of 10, so it's a really, really personal service, even though it sounds enormous. So yeah, a really, really personal service by an English-speaking team to look after you from applying for visa, health insurance for moving to France, and then once you're actually living in France as well.
Lovely, thanks, Paulette. And Amanda?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Amanda Johnson and I'm an international financial advisor. I moved to France in 2006 and Spectrum has been around since 2003 and we have financial advisors throughout France. I'm very lucky and fortunate to be in the Loire Valley, and our key role is to help everybody with things like inheritance tax planning, investments, and just making sure that your wealth that you've created is protected while you're living here in France. And I'm ready for all the questions. So thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Amanda. And Jonathan?
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Yes, my name is Jonathan Watson. I'm one of the senior traders at Lumon. Lumon, we are an international payment provider with real expertise in the foreign property market. So here to manage really the purchase of currency for your French property transaction and all future living costs. So one of the things we like to do in these webinars is actually find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we are going to launch a poll just to find out a little bit more about when you might be planning on looking at property in France. Sure you're aware this type of transaction won't happen overnight, and it's just helpful for us to get a bit more information about when you might be looking, whether it's the earlier part of the year or perhaps a bit later in the year. Just so we can try and give you as much relevant information regarding that purchase window. So thank you very much everyone who has answered. Quite a lot of people looking in the early part of this year, which is often expected, and a few for next year. But yeah, lots of information tonight will be provided for all of you. So thank you everyone who's answered that poll. Just going to launch our second poll, and that's regarding within the timescales you might be financially able to put in an offer. Again, buying property in France won't happen overnight, and particularly when we're looking at the foreign exchange side of things, the payments, the window for a French property purchase, you can be looking at a good 3 months, and exchange rates can be fluctuating quite a bit within that window. So certainly from a foreign exchange point of view, understanding the timelines for when you might be looking to put those offers in would just help us to give you some really relevant information regarding how we can stage some of those currency purchases so that you're not missing out on any particularly good rates and avoiding potentially any lower times in the market to make the exchange. So thank you everyone who's answered that poll. And then just our final poll, finding out a little bit more about you, our audience, and that's where you're joining us from. The actual buying process will be exactly the same wherever you are buying from within the world, but there can be little nuances, certainly if we're looking at banking, perhaps some visa, residency questions, wealth management, etc. too. So yes, thank you for everyone who's answered that poll. A majority there from the UK, but a lot of people from America and also from the rest of the world. So yeah, very much in line with what I would expect there. And we look forward to giving you some really useful information wherever you're joining us from tonight. So thank you everyone who's answered those polls, and back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Jonathan. So let's get started on some of the questions. Let's start off with a French property buying question for Joanna. And this comes from another Joanna Massey in the USA. She says, do I need a law firm with comprehensive services to secure the mortgage, review paperwork and a notary, or can I rely on a realtor stroke estate agent and a bank? Sorry, I think you're still muted.
There we go. Thank you, Karen. Yes, certainly you would. You certainly don't need a law firm. Some people choose to take one, but it's not necessary. The notaire has the final say on everything. The notaires in France are neutral, so they work for both the buyer and the seller. And the agent works alongside the notaire. So for us in particular, we have our own legal department and a contracts team. So we do actually draw up contracts, well, the compromis de vente, not the final act, and we work alongside the notaire with the buyer and the seller as well. So it's not necessary. The notaire is completely neutral. So basically, they're like the tax collectors. They work for the government. 20% of the fee that you pay the notaire goes to the notaire. The rest is actually in government taxes and land registry and things like that. It's probably one of the safest countries to buy in the world. It's extremely safe in France. You know, even as us as agents, we have to follow extremely strict guidelines. So yeah, it's a very straightforward process, and you know, we don't seem to have any problems. And most of the notaires these days speak English if you don't speak French. And if they don't, we can get another notaire that can speak English with you on your behalf. But in answer to the question, it's not really necessary.
That's great. Thanks, Joanna. So we've got another question from another Joanna this time, but it's for Tracy this time, and it's from Joanna and Andy Morris in the UK. They say, we wish to move to France permanently and would really like a step-by-step of what to do, in which order and what comes first. And I appreciate that's quite a lot of information, but a bit of a checklist for them would be handy.
So if you wanted to have, you know, a deep dive and a real good checklist on your situation, Joanna, then obviously you would book an R&R meeting with, which is a residency and relocation planning meeting. We go through your project step by step of all the things that you'll have to go through, and of course everybody's situation is different, even if there are some guidelines. So I'm going to give you a few pointers here, but yeah, if you really, anybody who really needs a deep dive into the project to have a real clarity on the situation, then book a consult. However, the first step I would suggest, obviously before you come to France, whether that's from the UK or America or anywhere else in the world, is about obviously organising logistics. So there's things to take care of before you come to France. Logistics for your move, informing the tax offices that you're leaving your country of origin, and visas, of course. Visas was one of the first things, it's not one of the last things to think of, and it's even often time before finding your dream home with the team here with LEGGETT, of course. So it's kind of hand in hand with looking for your property. I would say the visa, at least start working on that project. Then of course, once you're in France, it would be validation of visas, then it would be affiliation with the French healthcare system. Then there would be the driving licenses exchange, depending on what type of driving license you have, the validity of the driving license, which country you're from, if there's a reciprocal agreement in place, and all of that we can go through in detail on a one-on-one. Of course, then there's affiliation to the tax as well, so getting your tax in place, making sure that you have your online account set up, both for local taxes and for income taxes. And then before you know it, you're onto the renewal stage. Generally speaking, when we take clients, we take them from 2 months before they come to France, 2 or 3 months before they come to France, through to month 10 of being in France when we get to the renewal process, because renewals of visas and residency cards take place at month 8 and 9. And then of course, depending if you've got a business project, that would also be before that. So you can see there are certain steps to take. There is a domino effect to it, absolutely, and you can't do step 5 before step 1. So start off by, obviously today you've got access to a lot of experts here. You've got Joanna's team for property, you've got obviously me for visas and paperwork, you've got all the team for finance, for your private healthcare and things like that. But the step-by-step approach is definitely starts 2 months before you come to France, with the logistics, and finally go through all the different paperwork processes, and it takes a year, at least a year, to really get into the system. And of course, the last thing I would say is if you're a retiree moving to France, the extra step to take would be to reach out to get your S1 from the Department of Health and Pensions before you come to France.
Lovely. Okay, thanks Tracy. So let's have a tax question now for Amanda. Jeremy Schultz in the USA says, could you please detail all the taxes for 1, buying, and 2, yearly ownership of houses? So buying taxes and annual property taxes, I guess.
Okay, so when you buy your house, your LEGGETT agent will introduce you to a notaire and things. So you'll have a notaire fees, and that's typically around about 9%. I'm sure Joanna will be able to confirm that. And then you've got your land registry fees, which depend on each department. Now I know with Karen, she has a really good website which is called French Property News, and you can find lots of really good information on there. I would say you need to allow around about 5%, if not slightly more, maybe 5.8. And so that's all your buying costs per se. And then your annual costs for taxes, if you are British, you will have paid like a council tax or poll tax. That shows my age, doesn't it? So if you think of it as something that is an amount that you would pay to the local government, so your local council, for the services that you have. So if you live in it, buy a house that's in a little hamlet and you have, for example, street lights, you'll pay slightly higher than if you're in a little hamlet that doesn't have street lights. So it's all of those type of things. And again, your local LEGGETT agent will be able to confirm all those to you, because they'll get that directly from the current owner of the property. So they're not as big as you think that they're going to be, and your LEGGETT owner agent will be able to provide you exactly with what those details are.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. And Joanna, just confirm, I think usually when people are looking at properties, you can tell them actually then and there what their tax foncier, their property taxes are going to be for the year, can't you? Sorry, it's still on mute.
Yes, you can. Yeah, at the time, you know, when you're purchasing, sometimes it's actually on the details of the property what the tax foncier is. There is a tax habitation if it's a secondary residence that you would need to pay. If it's your primary residence, they've scrapped that, the tax habitation. If it's your only, if you're moving permanently, so there's two if it's a holiday home and one if it's not. But we can tell you those prices right at the beginning of you know, when we're doing a viewing, for example.
Yep, that's great for people because then they can know what they've got to budget for ahead. Okie dokie, let's move on to a mortgage question now for Sharon. Margie Ricks in the USA says, will I be able to get a mortgage if needed? And she's looking for a holiday home in France.
Hi, thanks, Karen. Hi, Margie. Yes, potentially you could get a mortgage. First of all, we would need to see if you would be eligible for a mortgage. French mortgages are they're income based, they're not asset based. So lenders will look closely at the affordability of the mortgage, what your income is. They will look at your debt related outgoings, so your existing commitments such as mortgages, rent, hire purchase agreement, loan payments, etc. And then they will calculate how much you can borrow. You can spend up to 35% of your monthly taxable income in France on debt-related outgoings. So everything I've just mentioned, including a new mortgage. You will also need a deposit to put down for the property purchase price. So that's your down payment. Typically, as a non-resident in the US, you'd be looking at between 20 and 30% deposit plus the purchase costs. So if you are looking at a second home, it is completely possible to get a mortgage afterwards. It depends really on your personal situation, and you can get in touch with our team at CAFP and we can help assess how much you'd be able to borrow, and more importantly, tell you what the conditions are so that you're able to make sure that that's something that's acceptable to you so that you can plan and then find the perfect property with Joanna and her team. So I hope I've answered your question. Okay, it's a really difficult question to answer quickly.
Thanks, Sharon. I think people should, Margie and other people in the same situation should get in touch with Sharon as soon as possible to find out if they are eligible for a mortgage. So, okay, let's move on to one for Paulette. Linda Probert says, what are the healthcare requirements to move to France? It is very important, isn't it, the healthcare side?
Yeah, absolutely. It very much depends on the type of visa you're applying for, which Tracy would be able to help you with that. To kind of make it really short, because I could probably take an hour talking about it, but I won't. So it very much depends. If you're coming from, say, the UK, and you're normally of UK state retirement age, as Tracy mentioned before, you can apply for an S1. So that is your health care requirement for moving to France. If you're moving for, you've signed an employment contract, things like that, if you come in on an active basis, that forms as the healthcare with your visa application. However, if you're coming as inactive, then you will need a health insurance to accompany your visa application. There's so many different circumstances, but generally, if you need that health insurance to accompany your visa application, there's quite a few types of contracts out there. Some require a medical questionnaire and some don't. However, even if it doesn't require a medical questionnaire, doesn't necessarily mean that everything health related is covered. So, the term "you get what you pay for" is probably very true in this case. In terms of once you move to France, even if you don't need that insurance policy for your visa application, you're not going to apply for your social security number the day you arrive. So you can also take a policy that covers for accident and emergency for the first few weeks and months in France while you're waiting to get your French social security number. So, there's different levels of policies available. Sorry, I feel like I'm losing my voice. Different levels of policies available, and I would say everybody's circumstances, as Tracy probably knows, are just slightly different. So, it's kind of like one doesn't suit all, but we'll do our best to tailor make the policy to suit your circumstances and budget. But it's, yeah, complex but easy at the same time.
It's all knowing who to speak to.
Exactly.
So a currency one for Jonathan now. I'll shortly need to transfer the deposit from my UK bank to the notaire for a holiday home we're buying in France, but I don't have a French bank account yet. Can I do it without one?
Thank you, Karen. Okay, well, the answer is yes, you can pay a notaire in France without a French bank account. You don't need to have a bank account in France to pay the notaire. With Lumon, we can actually offer a Euro wallet, which can be used to pay the notaire directly. So first step dealing with us is to register to open a trading facility totally free of charge. Only takes a few minutes, and then you get access to this Euro wallet. What it is a client account. It's a Euro client account, so a bit like a solicitor or other sort of professions where they will hold money on behalf of a client, sometimes called an escrow account. That's a US terminology. So Lumen operates bank accounts like this, client accounts, escrow accounts in all of the different currencies that we trade. So you have access to this Euro account once you're registered, and then you can use that to pay directly to the notaire. Of course, we work very closely with LEGGETT. I think last year it was about 750 different French notaires that we dealt with, payments to and from. So very likely that we've paid your notaire at some point or received money from them at some point in the past. So yeah, it's a very simple process to arrange the payment directly to the notaire using this wallet. You will perhaps a bit further down the line open a French bank account for perhaps utilities and other points that you'll need, but you don't actually need it in the early stages, and it's often a lot easier to make payments directly to the notaire from this wallet. Certainly if we're talking about larger amounts of money, say for the actual completion funds, you know, it could be talking very large 5, 6, maybe even 7-figure sum. With the French banks, a bit like banks in the UK, banks in the US, if you're moving a much larger sum of money, you've sometimes got to actually physically go into the bank, haven't you, to actually organise that type of payment. So using the wallets with Lumon, there's none of that extra sort of admin. We have all our own sort of security checks and controls, but it's a much sort of simpler, smoother process. And again, we can pay that directly to the notaire. So it just helps to streamline everything. And you can actually use the wallet to lock in a rate if the rates are jumping around a bit, as they have been. So short answer there, no, you don't have to have a French bank account open to pay your notaire.
That's good to know, because it can sometimes be quite a short period between offering on a property and signing the first contract, the compromis de vente. And I guess it's one less thing to worry about, although obviously people will want to open a bank account further down the line. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Jonathan. So let's move on to another buying question for Joanna. Margie Rick says, what does exclusive mean in reference to property? So you see that on property adverts, don't you? Sometimes it has exclusive or exclusivity written on it.
Yes, so it's depend. The exclusive means it's exclusive to that particular agency. So you can't buy it through another agency. You can't buy the property privately with the vendor. If the vendor has signed an exclusive mandate with the agency, it means that the agency is doing as much marketing, etc., and everything for that property, and they have a certain period of time that they have to sell it in. So they work harder. They've got it for say 3 months, and then they have to renew the contract if it's exclusive. But it just means that because in France you could have maybe 6 or 7 agencies working on the same property. So it means that you are really in control of what's happening. We're having personal conversations with the vendor. It means that another agency doesn't come in and sort of cut you out halfway through or things like that. So it's that's basically what it means. It means that the owner of the property has signed an exclusive mandate to just deal with one agency, and that means they also don't want to deal with the sale privately. They don't want anyone knocking on their door if there's a for sale sign. If it says exclusive, it means that you have to go through the agent that is looking after that particular property.
Lovely, thanks, Joanna. And it's, you know, it's obvious why that's attractive to estate agents to have exclusivity on it, but for buyers, it means you only have to deal with one agent. You don't, that agent will know everything that's going on, who's looking at that property. They're not having to sort of, guess whether other people are viewing it too. So it's a pretty good thing all round, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, certainly.
Okie dokie. So let's move on to another relocation question for Tracy. Steve de Havilland in the UK. He's looking to buy a home in France with a view of retiring there, and says, what do we need to consider? Now, I guess this is a fairly similar question to the previous relocation one, but specifics for retiring, which a lot of people wanted to do.
Yeah, I get a lot of this, of course, from the UK and a lot of America as well. People who are wanting to come across and retire. So there's two aspects. The fact remains from a visa perspective. If you're not going to work in France, then of course it would be a long stay visitors visa. And you can have people who want to retire to France who are not actually of retirement age. I think it's good to make that point as well. You could be an early retiree. We have people coming across who are quite young, who come into France who are not necessarily of retirement age at all, but just want to come to France and don't need to work because they're in a financial situation that they don't need to have to work if they don't want, and good on them. So if you want to retire to France, for me that is somebody who's not working. Doesn't matter what your age are. What will be important to take into account is the type of visa you're going to apply for, which is a long stay visitor visa, and the criteria that will be looked at, which is going to be financial, of course, that you're not a burden on the French society from a financial perspective, and that a healthcare perspective, like Paul had said earlier, you need to get a private policy, hopefully with Paulette to help you get that private insurance in place before you come to France. The only exception to that rule is, of course, for those people who are of pension age and in receipt of state pension, and they are exonerated from taking a private insurance out. So yes, for those who want to return to France, no matter what age you are, it's more about if you're going to work or not. If you're not going to work, long stay visitor visa, application from country of origin. So if it's the UK, application goes through the UK, the application online, the meeting at the visa centre, the consolidation of all the files, of course, along with the financial and healthcare. That you come to France, then the visa gets validated in France. There is an online process, extremely important to be taken into account because that triggers the immigration system behind the scenes. You go to your prefecture visit to get your visa stamped, and then you're in France legally until the renewal date, which I said earlier, is usually at month 8. So that would be for people who want to retire to France. But again, I emphasize it's not necessarily about the age, it's about what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it's a non-working visa, and people need to be aware of that. They've applied for a non-working visa. They can't then just sort of think, oh, I'm retired, but I'll just do a little bit of gardening or extra work. That's it. If you have that visa, you're not working, you are retired.
Certainly not for the first couple of years. There is a modification process you can go through, but you have to wait a year or two before you can do that. Yes.
Oh, that's handy to know. Okay, thanks, Tracy. So Amanda, another tax one for you now. Mark Bailey in the USA says, we're in the process of selling our home in the USA. Is there property tax if the home is our primary home? And I presume he means if the French home is their primary home.
Yeah, there's two different sides of everything. Okay, so if you are moving to France and you've got your visa, you've bought your property, you've basically got a year to get your house in order, as we'd like to call it. So you've got a year to sell your house in the US or sell your house outside of France before France will start looking at saying, well, actually, there could be some capital gains tax, and we'll have a little bit of that, please. So you've got a year's grace, which is why it's really important that you can speak to somebody like myself before you start the process, because ideally you want to get all your little ducks in a row so that you're not actually then paying extra capital gains tax when it's not really necessary for you to do so. So as I say, we deal with clients from all over the world. So for example, if it's your primary property in the UK, there may not be capital gains tax, but in the US it will depend on which state you're in. But my advice is, if you're thinking of coming to France, have a chat with me and we can make sure that all your ducks are in a line, so that you won't then necessarily have the difficulties of having to pay any capital gains tax anywhere.
Absolutely. Again, it's never too early to seek advice, I think is
Absolutely.
okay. So Sharon, another mortgages question for you. Brian Andrews in the UK says, what is the smallest value of a mortgage? And there are some real bargain French homes in France, so
the actual smallest mortgage you can get, the legal minimum mortgage amount, is 21,500 euros. However, it's very difficult to get a mortgage that small for several reasons. Some banks have a minimum loan amount, i.e. they won't open the case for a non-resident or an expat file if you don't meet a minimum mortgage amount of 100,000, 250,000. There are lenders that will lend for less than that. However, they will look very closely at the value and the condition of the property, where the property is located, and also at your situation. So they will decide whether it's worthwhile opening a mortgage file, because it's a lot of work and it's also more financial risk for them on a lower value property because of potential market fluctuations. Whilst we can get, I mean, I'm just arranging a mortgage, I've just arranged a mortgage for a couple in the US of 65,000 euros. They were a young couple, life insurance wasn't very much, because we have to keep the APRC, the annual percentage rate of charge, which is the TAEG in France, without going into too complex of an explanation. But in France, we have something called the usury rate, which is called the taux d'usure, which is the maximum a mortgage, the APRC, can be on a mortgage, and it's set by the Banque de France. Once every quarter, they issue the maximum rates that the APRC can be to avoid banks charging abusive rates. If you're looking at French mortgages, you will notice that interest rates between banks are often quite similar. You might have one at 3.8% and one at 4.4%, but you won't have one at 3.8% and one at 6.8%. And that's because of the usury rate, a mechanism that's in place to protect borrowers from abusive rates from the bank. However, it backfires when you look at small mortgages, because in the annual percentage rate of charge, you have all of the kind of the additional costs of the mortgage. So life insurance, lenders arrangement fees, the cost of registering the legal charge, etc. So when you add in all of these costs, and it's on a small amount of capital, the APRC will be higher. So you're more likely to hit the usury rate, which then makes it illegal for the bank to lend. So that's the complex situation, and that's why you will sometimes find that some banks will say, well, yes, we can lend a small amount, but we can't lend a small amount to you, because it might be because your life insurance costs more. There's lots of different variables, so it's something that we can look at. Don't come into France and think, oh, I can't get a mortgage because I've been told you can't get a mortgage under 250,000. That's one bank's policy. Other banks will have different policies, and everybody's situation is different. It might be that you want a mortgage of 100,000 on a property somewhere and we can't help you, but if that was on another property somewhere else, we might have a different lender that may be able to help you. So a really complex question to answer, but technically, yes, you can get small mortgages in France.
Thanks, Sharon. That's really interesting. So let's move on to a healthcare one for Paulette now. Keith Pitts in the UK says he's been recently diagnosed with hopefully treatable cancer. How would this affect his health insurance and his visa applications?
Okay, so Keith, I'm not sure whether we're looking at this from the perspective of moving over whilst you're having treatment or after treatment. I would say whilst you're having treatment, probably very difficult. Yes, you could apply for a health insurance that has no medical questionnaire, but it will not cover any pre-existing illnesses. Now, whilst you're having treatment, that also means it won't cover any treatment. If after your treatment is finished, yes, you may be able to get that policy with no medical questionnaire, but equally, it won't cover the pre-existing medical conditions. So you've got a chance that if you don't fall ill due to, you don't relapse or anything, you're going to be okay, and it will cover accident emergency. It's not very, it's not great cover. It's accident and emergency. But if that accident or emergency is linked to pre-existing illnesses, it won't pay. So whilst those types of policies are available, and quite a lot of people think, oh, that's great, that's in my budget. It's in your budget before, but when you come over to France and it doesn't provide much cover and something happens, then it's not really in your budget. We do work with insurers that will cover pre-existing illnesses, and there are some where if you've had, say, cancer or other illnesses, they're studied on a case-by-case basis. So it may well be that we can find an insurer who will cover you, but obviously it depends on your budget. The more risk there is for the insurer, the higher the cost generally. So we can go from bare bones of accident and emergency. Yes, you'll have a certificate, but honestly, when you move to France, it doesn't provide great cover, to more comprehensive policies that will actually start to provide that cover. And the good news is that once you're in France and you've been here for 3 months, you've got the right to apply for a French social security number. There's no medical questionnaire for that. Once you've got your social security number and you apply for a mutual top-up, it's rare that there's a medical questionnaire for the mutual top-up as well. So once you're in the French health system, then you're in. There's no barriers regarding that. And you may also be put onto what's called 100%, where any treatment to do with your cancer is covered 100% by the state. There's certain illnesses where that's covered, for example, diabetes, heart conditions, serious heart conditions and things like that are actually covered 100% by the state. So once you're in France and in the system, it's easy.
That's great. Thanks for that, Paulette, and good luck, Keith. Right, so let's move on to a currency question for Jonathan. I keep hearing about forward contracts, but I'm not sure how they work in practice. Could you explain them in simple terms? Now, this could be a question for me because I've read about forward contracts loads, but if somebody asked me to explain them, I'm not sure I could.
Oh, well, hopefully I can help out there, Karen. The forward contract is very simple. What is it? It's an agreement to buy currency now for payment in the future. So it's used to fix exchange rates. To use an analogy of something else, it's very similar to a sort of buy now, pay later deal that you get for, say, a sofa or a kitchen or a TV. You get your kitchen installed, but you don't have to pay for it for 12 months. So any arrangement where you receive sort of something now, you're buying your currency now, you're locking in a rate on the full amount of money now, but you don't have to pay for it all. And you can in fact choose a date in the future by which to pay it off. Now, we do ask, typically you're going to ask for a deposit on that around 5 to 10% of the total. So if it was £100,000 you were selling on the forward contract, about £5,000-10,000 as a down payment, and then the balance, the 95,000 or the 90,000 would be owed in, say, 3 months. That's a typical window for one of these contracts because that's the typical timeline for a French purchase. So yes, 3 months later you'd pay that off, and then you get your £100,000 worth of currency. So advantages of this are really peace of mind and certainty of the exchange rate. The rate is locked in. So that means if the market goes higher, you're not going to benefit if the rates get better. But I would say, most importantly, if it drops, you're not going to lose anything. No embarrassing phone calls to Jo or any of her team about the property becoming very expensive, potentially not being able to afford it. That's always possible with currency rates. There's been a lot of volatility lately. So it's a really handy contract if you're, say, selling a property in the US, selling a property in the UK to buy over in France, and you might not be getting your money from that UK or US sale for a few months, for say 2 months. You could use a forward contract to lock in the rate so that once you get your hands on the money from that sale, the euro return is guaranteed. So you're not going to wake up to a lower rate and find the property becomes more expensive. So forward contract. It's a pretty cool contract. Very happy to talk through it with anyone if they do have more questions. But yes, it's an agreement to lock in your rate for payment in the future. Has that been a bit better for you, Karen?
It has, and I shall just keep that in my brain. Buy now, pay later, and I'll remember then. That was very good. Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.
So, buying question for Joanna now. Christy Hull in the US says, what are the financial / legal / admin items I must prove to sign a compromis de vente? And that's the initial sales contract, isn't it? And they also want to know the same for to finalise an acte de vente, so completion document.
I would start preparing all of this paperwork in advance, because there are certain things, like if you were married and you're divorced, could have been divorced 20 years ago, you need to have the divorce settlement, you know, the papers to say that you're divorced. And sometimes, you know, you have to go and apply to a court to get them because you don't have a copy of them. So things like that. So yes, the divorce certificate, a marriage certificate. If you're married, you need the marriage certificate. When you're buying the property, you need proof of funds. Now that's a lot that we didn't used to have to do that back in the day, but you do need to have proof of funds these days for money laundering, etc. So they will ask, the notaire will ask to see proof of funds, and it will be the same for the mortgage company, as I'm sure Sharon will tell you. It's probably the same the paperwork that you're going to need for getting a mortgage. So all of this paperwork I would get right up in advance. You're going to need an ID and you're going to need birth certificates. If the birth certificates are in, or the marriage certificate is in English, or if it's, you know, you're in the States or it's in another language, you do need an official translation of that before you come to sign the final act as well. So you need a legal translator that can stamp that to have it translated into French. So I would start preparing all the paperwork as early as possible, have a little file of it all. You need proof of ID, so passport would be sufficient, and probably the best form of ID. Proof of funds, your marriage certificate, birth certificate. You don't have family books, I know, in the UK, but they do in France, which also shows the children. So if you've got, you know, children, you probably need to show those as well. But most of it you are actually going to need at the compromis de vente stage, because even if you are getting a mortgage for the property, the mortgage amount and the bank that you're borrowing from needs to go in, so that the interest rate, how much you're borrowing and which bank you're borrowing from does need to go in the compromis de vente stage. So you would have needed to already get that organised, because a mortgage is a suspensive clause. So if the bank refuses the mortgage within the time of the compromis being signed and it going to the final act, you can withdraw from the sale with no cost, and your deposit is returned to you because it's a suspensive clause. So get your paperwork in order first. That's what I would say, because then if you find the house of your dreams, you've got Sharon there ready to get on the case with the mortgage because you've got all your paperwork. We can get your compromis de vente signed up with Sharon's mortgage advice, and you'll be on your way to getting the property.
That's great. Thanks, Joanna. So one now for Tracy from Eleanor Hurry, and she says, we are a young family of 5. We're considering immigrating to semi-rural France to escape the rat race. On the last webinar, a lot of questions focused on retirement. We're a long way off this and wondered, how realistic is it for a young family with no previous ties to France to move there successfully for longevity?
You know, that's a fabulous question, isn't it, really? And thank goodness we do have families that move across to France. We don't just have people across moving to retiree. You know, thank goodness, you know, I've been doing this for 15 years myself, so I've had all sorts of people move to France. And so as a family moving, there absolutely is a path to move into France. Now, if you're not going to work, you not have a business, or you have no idea of what you want to do in France, of course, you're going to have to meet some criteria. So you'll need to have your address, so you need to work with, you know, if you're buying via LEGGETT, or you need to have an address to put down on your visa applications. And you come across as a family, so you could come across your non-working visas. Like I said, it's not about the age, it's about the criteria. So as long as you're financially independent and you can prove that, You can come across as a couple with your children. The children, of course, what people don't necessarily realise is the children do have to have a visa application, no matter what age the children are. So there is a visa application for families, so there'll be like 2 adults and 3 children. The visa application would go along as a group, but that you have the individual applications as well. The difference between the adults and the children is that when the adults come to France, they get validated and they go through the visa validation process. The children, they don't. They then have to go through the DCEM process, which is the circulation document, which is not obligatory but highly advisable. All my clients, I make sure they get a DCM for the children. And one thing that you have to bear in mind for the children is they also need to be, if they're of school age, they have to be, the application has to be in for their schooling. So on the visa, when you go to the visa for the children, you go and see proof that the children are actually going to go to school in France if they're of school age, so 3 years onwards. So it's absolutely possible to come in non-working, for example, if you want to come and live your best life in France, as I say, you know, find your property, maybe come across rent, find your property with Leggett, get everything organised, get your ducks in a row, as we say, and then maybe look to work or have a business. You can do that later on, especially, you know, if you're obviously a young couple and want to find out what you want to do. What I would say on that point is make sure you renew your visa first. A long stay visitor's visa, you get a renewal point at monthly, it gets renewed online, you get your residency card, and then you can look at modifying, and maybe you get a job offer, you want to get sponsored, or maybe you have a business ID, you want to get an independent liberal visa or a talent visa. So there are avenues then to work or have a business in France, but it's much further down the path, at least 18 months down the path. Okay, does that make sense? Does that answer the question? If not, do reach out. I'll be happy to have a discussion with you.
I mean, that is a very big question, and there's all the logistics and the visas and the sides of that, and then of course there's the whole, you know, settling into another country. But lots of young families have moved from other countries to France. Lots of British young families have moved over to France and been welcomed into their local communities and settled well and mixed. So good luck to you, Eleanor.
Lots of families coming across. It's lovely, thank goodness, because if we had just retirees, I mean, we'd be a little bit sad if we had just retirees coming across. So, you know, lots of families coming across, and thank goodness, it's great.
Absolutely, it's a wonderful lifestyle for all ages. So let's move on to a text question from Amanda. We have one here. If we sell our French holiday home, which we've owned for 7 years, will we pay French capital gains tax on it? And they don't, I don't know if that's the UK or the US, but they're not, it's a holiday home, not permanent home.
Okay, so if we look at it just from a generic point of view, so if you are selling a property and it's not your main residence, then there could be a potential capital gains tax. But don't forget, you're only going to pay capital gains tax if you've made a profit. So I think that's really, really important. So let's say that you buy a holiday home for €200,000 and you bought it in the year, if you bought it, you know, 7 years ago, and you're selling it now for 200,000, then there isn't going to be any capital gains tax because you haven't made a profit. Okay, so I think that's really important. Your Leggett agent, when you sell the property, they will, there is, if the person is British or lives outside of Europe, and that you've made a certain amount of profit, there's an extra process, I believe, and your Leggett agent will be able to help you with that, as will the notaire. So don't get too caught up about it, because if you do have to pay capital gains tax and you've had it, as you said, for 7 years, then after you've had it for 6 years, there is a slight discount on the tax and also on the social charge element. But don't forget, in order to pay capital gains tax, you've got to make a profit, and you'll only be taxed on the difference. So, you know, you're still going to come away with at least your 200,000 if that's what you started with. So don't get too hung up about that, and hopefully you'll decide to just stay here and get the benefit of it for holidays and high season.
And France, of course, doesn't have such a boom and bust sort of property market
No.
as other countries. Property prices don't often really leap up. So as you said,
Yeah.
you know, you only pay capital gains tax if you've made a profit on it.
And if you've had some work done, for example, and you've had that work's been done by an artisanal, or you've paid VAT on the work that's been done, then again you can present all those bills to your notaire so that they can then offset those as well. So you know,
absolutely.
try not to worry too much.
But not if you've done all the work yourself, unfortunately.
Absolutely, yes. True.
Okie dokie. So let's move on to a question for Sharon. Lisa Heyman in the USA says, what different types of mortgages are available? What mortgages are available? Is there just one mortgage or lots of different types?
Mortgages in France are actually quite vanilla. They're very straightforward. They tend to be capital repayment, long-term fixed rate mortgages, i.e. you take a mortgage and it's fixed for the entire duration of the mortgage. Afterwards, where it kind of gets a little bit more complicated, is there are banks in France which have a nationwide coverage, and there are banks which are then what we call LEGGETT régional, so regional banks, but they have the same name as banks in the other region. So they're part of, like if I say, for example, Crédit Agricole, they have different regions. I'm trying to think of how best to explain this. And therefore, the mortgages might differ from region to region. So effectively, it's the same bank, it's the same name, but you'll have different mortgages available with different conditions in different regions. So that's where sometimes people get confused, thinking there's lots of different mortgages available and there's lots of different options. But actual mortgage products here tend to be fixed rate, capital repayment, and duration is generally between about 15 and 25 years. 25 years is the maximum duration for a mortgage, unless you're buying a new build property where we can go up to 27 years. So in terms of the mortgages available, you don't get things, you can get slight variations, like you might have one bank offering a cap and collar mortgage, which is like a floating rate mortgage with a cap on the maximum interest rate and a collar on the lower, what the interest rate can go down to in case of fluctuation, but that's quite rare. You may also get another bank offering a very small interest only period, like a deferral period, where you're deferring the capital repayment of the mortgage, and then it converts to a capital repayment mortgage. Those are exceptions, they're not the norm, but we might have, depending on your criteria, a little difference in types of products available, but generally it's straightforward capital repayment. At the end of the mortgage, it's all paid off.
That's great, thanks Sharon. If it sounds complicated, people obviously, if you're going through a mortgage broker like Sharon, she will be able to explain it all and basically pick the best ones for you. So don't need to worry too much about it.
No, we explain everything in great detail, so
great, lovely. Okay, thank you, Sharon. Paulette, an insurance question for you, this time on home insurance. Is it easy to get home insurance in France? What do I need to consider?
It's really easy to get home insurance in France. That's nice and reassuring. Things to consider is it may not be quite the same as the insurance in the country you've come from. So I've worked in the UK for many years before I moved to France. So I can point out kind of the main differences. So home insurance in the UK is called all risks. So it covers all risks. It doesn't matter what caused the risk, caused the damage, it's covered on your insurance. France is very different. It's called multi-risk, and there's a list of those risks on your insurance policy. So fire, theft, climatic damage, you know, things like that. So if the damage is one of those multi-risks, then it's covered. So accidental damage isn't the same as it is in the UK. As in the UK, it doesn't matter who causes it. You know, if you knock a tin of paint over, or well, yeah, if you knock a tin of paint over and it damages your carpet, you're covered. If that happened in France, they'd just say, yeah, what should you do that for? However, there is a system that's a responsibility civil, which is like public liability insurance, and that is included in your home insurance. So if you go to someone else's house and you knock the tin of paint over there, then that may be covered under responsibility civil, and that's damage or injury you cause to someone or something. And that is a thing in France, but not your own property. As I found out when I backed one of our cars into the other of our cars, I couldn't claim on myself because I caused the damage. Anyway, that was an easy way to learn that. Things in terms of the general insurance, yeah, it's pretty much similar to the rest of the world. Number of rooms is important. We don't ask you to take hours estimating a rebuild cost. Who knows what the rebuild cost of your property is? I used to find that quite odd when I worked in the UK, but in France we take the number of rooms, and they're like habitable rooms. So for example, we don't count functional rooms. So we don't count a kitchen or a laundry room or a bathroom or a toilet. We take rooms that you would sit or sleep in. I do spend a lot of time in my laundry room, but it's not counted. So it is quite different, but you need to be careful about outbuildings. We quite often have clients who don't tell us about outbuildings because they think they're not in a great state. I don't want to insure them. I'm not bothered. However, if there's a claim on the property and the expert goes to the property and they say, hang on a minute, you've got outbuildings, they're not on the policy. You've still got to declare them. You don't have to insure them, but they need to be mentioned on your policy because they are covered for public liability. So it is important to tell your insurer everything about the property, and also unusual things. Non-domestic pets, for example, if you have goats and they go off and eat you've got a farm as a neighbour and they go off and eat half the crops, that farmer's going to want to claim against you. So it's important they have non-domestic pets, although I think a goat might be counted as a domestic pet. But for example, if you have unusual animals, and also if you're buying an unusual property that has turrets, or it's over 25 rooms, or it's something unusual, please don't call us on the day that you're signing the act to say, oh, I need insurance. Larger properties and chateaus and things like that is going to need a study, and that's going to take a couple of weeks. And sometimes we act as a broker and we go and find a specialist company for you for that type of policy. And I would very much recommend when you sign the compromis de vente, start looking at the insurance then, especially if it's an unusual property, because you've got normally 3 months before you're going to sign the act. It's nice to have everything, the insurance set and sorted, and you've got the certificate, so you turn up at the notaire on the day to sign, you've got your certificate, and there's no panic, and your estate agent from Leggett isn't going, where's your insurance certificate? You've already arranged it and everybody's calm.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Paula. There's some really interesting bits and pieces in there, and very good to know that you don't have to come up with the rebuild figure, because that always boggles my brain. That one in the UK. Anyway, time is moving on. Let's quickly get one last question in for Jonathan, and it's the $1 million question, or rather the £1 million question. How do I get the best rate for my pounds into euros?
Excellent. I love this question. Well, most obvious answer, speak to me, speak to anyone at Lumon. We'll help with competitive rates. We can demonstrate savings over the bank. So that's a sort of number one priority there. Make sure you're getting a competitive rate at the time of doing your actual currency exchange. That's fairly obvious. But with this 3-month window you've got from the compromis de vente being signed to the act de vente, the completion, rates are going to be moving a significant, well, might be, we can never guarantee anything in the currency markets. Rates are very likely to be fluctuating in that period. So it's a very common question: how do I get the best rate? When should I buy my euros? Now, unfortunately, no one on this planet can directly say, oh, you should on the 5th of May buy your euros. That's going to be the best date. For anyone who's watching this, it's the 23rd of April today. So no one knows exactly what's going to happen in the future with the currency. So really, I sort of throw the question almost back a little bit on the client and ask them about their budget. Can you afford for the rates to drop? Because if you can't, there's things we can do to lock in the rate in advance. So again, you don't have any of those embarrassing phone calls to Joe or anyone else because the rates have moved against you. Or if you don't want to, if you're a bit more speculative and you're prepared to take the risk that the rates could drop, then we can do clever things to monitor the market so that if it suddenly goes up, we can purchase your euros. Now, you might buy 10% if it goes up, you might buy 50%, you might buy 100%. There's no guaranteed answer of what you should or shouldn't do. It's really what's going to suit you according to your budget, your attitudes to risk. So best thing you can do to get the best rate, have a chat with a specialist like myself and some of the Lumon team, and we can just talk you through some options in the currency markets. Also the forecasts that are out there. All the big banks have forecasts. Some think it's going to go up, some think it's going to go down, but we can share all of this information with you, talk it through, and ultimately try and find you a deal that you'll be happy with.
Lovely, thanks Jonathan. So bang on 7 p.m. in the UK here. So that's the end of this webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. The next webinar will be on the 21st of May, and you'll receive details by email about how to register for that one. Do join us. The questions vary from webinar to webinar, always some fascinating topics discussed. You'll also receive a recording of the webinar, which is really handy if you missed anything or you just want to listen to something again. Sorry we didn't have time to answer all of your questions, but all our panelists' details are on the screen. They're very happy for you to get in touch with them. They can discuss your situation in detail, so please do contact them for anything you need help with. So I'll just hand over to the panelists to say their farewells too. So Joanna?
Yes, thanks everyone for coming along. If any of you are in London on the 9th of May, we are at the Place in the Sun exhibition in Excel, so do come along and see us on the stand. And I think Tracy's there and Paulette's there as well. So we'll be there to see you if you're around at that time, and look forward to seeing you next month on the next webinar.
Thanks Joanna. And Tracy?
Yes, I had a great evening, some great questions. Thanks, Karen. It was a really good interactive session, lots of great questions. And yes, I'll be there at the Excel Centre on the 9th of May, so pop across and see us all. And if not, see you on the next webinar.
And Sharon?
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everybody. I hope everybody found the answers to mortgages, the mortgage questions helpful. Plan ahead, get in touch. Our consultations are free. There are no upfront costs involved in arranging a French mortgage. So it's really a good idea to take the steps and find out what's applicable in your situation, not what you've read on the internet, not what your neighbour's done, what you can do. And we'd be very happy to help you. So have a lovely evening and thank you for listening.
Thanks, Sharon. And Paulette?
Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody. Yeah, if you're in London the weekend of the 9th, it'd be lovely to see you. I'd just like to say that I always say you don't know what you don't know, but we know what you don't know. So, you know, get in touch and we'll tell you what you don't know and explain the process. Most of my team, including myself, have been through the move, so we really, really do know what you don't know.
Thanks, Paulette. And Amanda?
Thanks very much, Karen. Thank you, everybody, for listening in the questions. I would just say it's never too early to answer, to ask a question, and there's not been a question I haven't been asked before. So don't be shy and ask away, and we will make sure that your move to France goes as smoothly as it can. And have fun.
Absolutely, have fun. Thanks, Amanda. And Jonathan?
Yes, thank you very much, Karen, for hosting. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, audience, for joining us. On the currency side of things, I'll just point out the market's been particularly volatile in the last few weeks. A currency strategy is always really, really important for some of the reasons I've covered. But just this month, 100,000 euros has varied by £3,600. And in dollar terms, it's varied by $6,000. Buying 100,000 euros. So it just shows how important those currency fluctuations can be. So yes, not just getting the best rate, it's actually about a strategy to plan your costs so the whole transaction can go through smoothly. So yeah, very happy to speak to anyone about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So thanks to our panelists. Thanks everyone for joining us. We hope the webinar has been helpful, and we'll see you next time. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.